how it gets sliced, and then how lithography, which is now is for our purpose is photolithography, which is printing using light, is being used in order to transfer maps of the chip we refer to as masks to print the different layers of the chip. Yani it is exactly as if I decide that if in this location on the wafer I'm going to implant a drain or ions to represent the drain by showering them at this specific location. So mask 1 will have an opening in this specific location. And then if I want to draw a line to another transistor, and this line has to move from location 1 to location 2, then I will have to connect to another transistor vertically, okay, through what we call pillars or contacts, and we will talk about them. Then I will have another mask that will specify with respect to the whole chip the exact location of this wire that I want to draw. So these are maps, just like we have maps for roads and we have maps for houses. We have maps for the different layers of the chip demonstrating the routing, yani all the possible connections at a given layer to be achieved from one location on the chip to another. Once those patterns are well designed and known, the masks are then used to transfer this information to print it on the chip, sort of to build the different layers that will eventually create a functional chip. That's the big picture that we want to look at. We will look at a small example of an inverter, and in this small example of the inverter, we will see what happens. Okay, so the 101 or step number 1 is that the wafer will get some insulator sprinkled on top of all of it. نعمل insulator layer, and then we will apply another layer of material which is sensitive to light on top of the insulator. Now the thing is that if I have my wafer layer, okay, this is my wafer, and then on top of the wafer I will have the insulator material or everywhere. This is the oxide, and then on top of this I will have a layer of photoresist. So this layer of photoresist will be here. Now if a mask says that I want to shine the light on this area here, if a mask says that I want to shine the light on this area here, okay, then this piece of the photoresist will be exposed. It will be vulnerable to specific chemicals, and therefore when I remove the mask, okay, and I wash the whole wafer with some chemical, this portion will be washed away and we will end up with the photoresist layer remaining only on this portion here. And so this portion of the oxide, okay, that remains will be exposed. And now if we put another chemical that will spill or flow on the wafer, that the places where we have the photoresist will be protected. Okay, so this will be protected and this will be protected, and this portion will be exposed and it will erode, it will be erased. So we will remove it. There might be some erosion at the peripherals, okay, but we will end up with mainly this portion as well of the oxide remaining that was covered by the photoresist. A third process comes and brings a chemical that removes the photoresist. So we wash away the photoresist now using a different chemical, and we will end up with the oxide in this pattern. So now I have the wafer insulated everywhere except in places where I want to do processing. And in those places where I want to do processing based on the map that is drawn in the mask, okay, I can now either send a shower of particles that will diffuse into this location here, okay, forming a source or a drain region or an N plus region, for example. Okay, so if I shower the particles, they will form a source or drain region. Or if I want to create a metal wire or a contact, meaning build a drill through, if we want to call this a drill through, if we want to connect what was previously, if we want to connect what was previously the source and the drain that I have done in a previous step. Okay, if I have already built in a previous step a source or a drain, and at this step I want to have a metal contact to connect, or a pin to connect this drain to the upper world, then I will really drop metal material and they will fill all the holes that I have built trenches for. Okay, and then I level the surface. So when I level the surface, I can then make sure that I have already my connections or my pins here ready to connect this to any metal wire that will be drawn in the second layer. So any metal wire that will go to another node now really has a pin here which will short it too. Okay, so things happen in layers, things happen in steps. The two important steps that we really care about is that I have insulator that will insulate everywhere else. I have a light sensitive material. I have a pattern that is going to be drawn, and that the processing happens only where the pattern was exposed or where light was exposed. And this is how we can achieve different shapes. This is how we can achieve different shapes and different connections and maps and print the different layers one at a time. Okay, so this is in a brief the story of fabrication on the chip. Now let us see what is relevant to us. We are going to talk about two things. The first thing, the steps themselves, okay? And the second thing, if I have a logic gate, which is the goal that we aim at, if I have a logic gate, which starts from the schematic of the transistors, okay, to the what we will call the layout. Okay, before the layout, we will have first the schematic of the transistors. Okay, from the transistor symbol, we are going to draw a sketch, or what we will call a stick diagram, and we will move towards this slowly. And this stick diagram is going to tell me, well, on the chip, if this is your chip and you want to draw this small gate in it, I expect that this gate will have VDD here, ground here, the NMOS transistor, the PMOS transistors here, the NMOS transistors here, and this is the output. So it is more like initial floor planning, just like when the designer wants the fashion designer wants to draw a dress, he starts by some sketching, then he refines it, then he colors it, then he realizes it. So in a similar manner, we will have the transistor connection. Then we will try to think, well, what is the most optimal layout? So we need to make some stick diagram sketches. Then we will go to the layout, which is really how the different layers, what different layers will be involved, and what are the different dimensions and stuff like that. So this is a geometrical interpretation of the design. Okay, this geometrical interpretation of the design will then be transferred to the maps or the masks. Okay, and this will then be printed on the chip and we will realize them and stuff like that. Okay. So, لكن here in this slide, we are showing that the photosensitive material is being exposed to light. Now, all of a sudden, I can remove the parts that were exposed and I can process under them either by showering some dopant atoms so that they will sit in the places that are open or exposed here, or by etching, يعني digging further at a specific layer so that I can put in this layer some metal wire, okay, that will connect location 1 to location 2. Okay, so this is in a brief what happens here. And the type of the photoresist that we use, we called it last time the positive because it is similar to the mask. And wherever I want to do a pattern, I shine the light. So it's a positive image, it reflects the image itself. طب great. لكن هلا lithography as processing steps has these steps. First we do oxidation, then we apply the mask. Once we apply the mask and remove the sensitive areas that were exposed, we either apply diffusion, which is putting material like the source or drain, meaning add ions, okay, or we do etching and we deposit metal layers or gate material. Why? Because the lower layer is the layer where I will have the transistor, I will have the source and drain, okay, and so here I will do deposition, okay, whereas the upper layers we are going to make connections from one transistor to another, so there will be wires, and those wires, as we will see, will occupy multiple layers. Okay, so I can have a wire going in layer 2 and I can have a wire going in layer 3. Okay, so these different layers for the wire metals. Okay, so if this is level 2 and this is level 1, for example, okay, those layers to happen, we need at every layer to draw some insulator. After I print layer 1, okay, I'm going to put a field oxide inside. So first, layer 1 gets some field oxide around it. Yani it's etched with the field oxide around it. After I finish layer 1, I put another layer of field oxide, okay? And if I want to make any other connection, then I will have to drill in here again and then draw the layers here, another layer. So this becomes layer 2. And then I will put more field oxide on top of this and go up to the higher layers. So it is really developed like a building layer by layer, okay? So that's what happens in building. This is why for every layer, okay, so I'm going to clear this. For every layer, okay, for every layer, I am going to repeat for the different layers. I'm going to put silicon dioxide, which we will refer on to as field oxide. This is important later when we study the capacitance. We will talk about field oxide. Then after this, we will put the photoresist plus the mask, okay? And then after this, we will apply the processing. يعني بنزيد الميتال, we draw the metal or stuff like that, etc. Okay, so these are the 3 steps that we will be repeating. Here they're just showing you that we're going to transfer the layout onto the mask and repeat those 3 steps until we finish the fabrication of the chip as we talked last time. So, this is simply repeating what I said, that I have the wafer, I have the silicon dioxide, I have the photoresist, I'm shining through the mask, this becomes exposed, so I can remove it and then I can trench or remove the silicon dioxide, and now I will have here silicon dioxide, sorry, in all the locations, but I have the wafer here exposed for processing. That's what all we want to know. So this is the transistor. Now that this is the transistor, we want to know what are these layers. If you see here, we drew for you that there is silicon dioxide. It's a field oxide. I have the wafer. The wafer starts as a p-type. All the wafer is p-type. Okay. Then for the specific transistor, I will have around it the source and the drain. Okay. And then I will have the thin oxide layer for the T-ox, and then I will have the gate, which is poly material in old times. Now it is again metal. Now, if I want to connect this transistor somewhere, I will need to make a contact and then send a wire, and the same here, make a contact and then send a wire. This really represents a transistor. Okay. Now, in modern technology, because the transistors are very small, we are digging trenches that isolate the transistors from each other, but this is a complex step that we're not going to talk about. Okay. Anybody has any questions?
Dr. Best, one small question.
Okay.
N-type, it also includes some P-type dopants, right?
The N+, it is
Yes.
the natural P substrate, يعني natural P substrate, but we shower at it a lot of ions that it becomes dominant. Because we started with the wafer, but mainly it has more N+, so it is the dominant density.
Okay, but the wafer is built from pure silicon atoms, right?
The wafer is built from pure silicon atoms. Typically, it is P-type, so it is processed little bit. Here, wafer, it is thick, right? The wafer is very thick. And really, they work on the surface of the wafer. So they make sure that it is uniform and it is P-type material, okay? And then they start to implant in it the transistors. Okay, so this is silicon. Okay, then they treat the surface and then they start to build the transistors. Okay.
Okay, all good. Thank
Okay,
you.
great. Thank you.
Doctor,
Yes.
I have a question. هلا أنا لما يكون عندي VHDL model أو Verilog model, the next step would be إنه أعمل اللاyout. إذا بدي أعمل ASIC أنا, the next step would be لازم أعمل layout manually ولا إنه صار في tools good enough إنه يعملوا لي إياها.
No, there are tools that do this. So let me, you can do. Okay, you are stepping into the next lecture, but I think it is good to answer it now. That's fine. We can skip it later. Let us look at this flow diagram. So it's okay. I'm going to mix and match between the two lectures. So let us look here. What you see here is really the different levels of design abstraction, and these are the different levels of design abstraction. We have, it's delayed short. We have the behavioral. We have here what you call the physical design. It doesn't show, I'm sorry, because of the sharing. Okay, and we have here the structural domain. بالbehavioral يعني everything that is related to the software. بالstructural يعني everything that is related to the logic. And the physical design is everything that is related to realizing this. And all of those three, they have three levels. We categorize them into the three abstraction levels. Those three abstraction levels هن architectural level, logic level, circuit level. Okay, so at the structural level, I have the transistors at the circuit. I have the gates and adders and registers at the logic level, and I have the processor and the memory at the big level, right? And then in the physical design, this corresponds to transistors, cells, and modules, right? لأنه أنا transistor بدي أرسمه كترانزستور هلا حنشوف كيف. Then I have the big gate, the unit gates, and then I have the modules اللي هن unit blocks which I realize in physical design. وهلا نحكي كيف نوصل from one to the other. In the behavioral level, you have the programs, the subroutines, and the instructions, and all of these are now co-designed together. So let us see really يعني هلا we jump on the next slide to answer you يعني بالbehavioral if I have a DSP algorithm that I want to realize it will be some algorithm and I want to translate it eventually into some form of binary addition يعني بالstructural أنا عندي n bit adder, a full adder, maybe an AND gate and in the physical I want to know how the chip is designed and then I want to have an adder module اللي عنده pins input and output وبعدين عندي gates involved in this adder the layout where VDD goes, the input and the output pins and the transistors, right? So to realize this, there's a complex flow here. It says you have the VHDL or the Verilog, صح? And it's the mixed word بين logic design and physical designer. Physical يعني اللي بيطبق لي building or the implementation. He's the civil engineer, okay? And then the logical design. So this goes through what we call logic synthesis tools. And those logic synthesis tools take the Verilog from the behavioral level into net listing يعني بيحول لي Verilog into and or and all of these functions that I know. So he creates a net list. The net list then gets subjected to system partitioning يعني we want to know how to best define our system and there are tools that do this in ASIC design flow. Then there is what we call the technology mapping, which is not shown here. يعني he is going to say, well, I have those gates, I'm going to map them to this technology, this type of gates and stuff like that. And there are simulations that happen. You see all this flow where we optimize things and we go back through this loop. We now do technology mapping and optimization. I want to size my gates, make them smaller, etc. to satisfy power and timing conditions. Once we settle down, this then goes to the physical design. So the physical design says, great, you have all of these units. Of course, I cannot put them sequentially connected to each other. My chip will be very large. And they are not all uniform, although I try to make them all as regular as possible. But I want to put the most optimal floor plan with the best clock distribution and all of these optimization problems. Where we have specific tools, this is where the design automation engineers play their role. And this is where like a lot of people now are trying to use machine learning also to apply to the EDA problems. And now within these blocks or units, I'm also going to design them so that they are optimally placed. And then I'm going to design each cell within these blocks. So بصير في عندي library of cells that get built and developed, and then the floor planning takes care of the big unit picture. This will result eventually in extracting the parasitics اللي هو نحن حنحكي عن البارازيتكس شوي later. And those parasitics that we take will affect لأنه أنا if I put this block on top of this block, the length of the wire is different than if this is placed here, and so the delay will be different, and therefore I may need to optimize my design and optimize my floor planning a little bit. So there is feedback really between those two levels. But in big companies, it is well structured that now they know what sort of passes they can go through and how to sort of divide the quota. Let us say my frequency is this much, so this unit should take this much delay, and this unit and the pipeline should have a certain frequency and stuff like that. And this block in the pipeline should have this much delay, and so on and so forth. Okay, so these are the different things that kick into play. يعني نحن we are studying the layout for two reasons, because there is something nice about the unit path and optimizing how things are connected, بس هيك to give you an idea for the stick diagrams, and also because later we are going to look at the impact of the parasitics of the wiring, and we're going to study the basics, the simple RC, but how this affects delay, and then look at the delay of the intermediate circuit and stuff like that. These are all just to give you an idea how designers use rule of thumb, rough equations to decide, and then they plug them into these big tools, and those big tools take care. And you have to give a good initial condition and pick up from there. Okay, does this answer you, Imad?
Yes, thank you.
Okay,
I have another question, بس كمان please.
Yes.
هلا ما بعرف إذا it might be too complex ولا لا، بس لما نحكي عن 2.5D و 3D stacking كيف بيتغير؟ كتير بيتغير البروسيس ولا
بنعتبرها just another layer؟ Very briefly about that at the end of this lecture, يعني very briefly, and I can answer this question towards the end. Okay, so let us continue to look at the transistor. So let us look at this. So this is important for you guys, like, to know how to read. Wow, this is complex. So let us see what we have here. We said that the wafer is really p-type. Okay, so let us say that I have an inverter, and this inverter has a PMOS and an NMOS. Okay, it has a ground here at this node VDD, and those are sharing the same VN. Okay, so let us look now how I can realize on the wafer an NMOS. Great, I'm going to draw the N plus for the source and the N plus for the drain. I'm going to draw the oxide layer, and I'm going to draw the gate poly. So I'm going to draw here the gate material. So I realize an NMOS, right? Type, the wafer is PMOS, and the PMOS, what is a PMOS made of? So a PMOS transistor, as we know it, is really has N-type and P plus, right? So the PMOS will have, we will draw them, but we will write the font differently. So here it will have P plus, and here it will have P plus, and this should be N, right? But I want to put it on the same wafer. So what do? We go ahead and we draw what we call an N well. Okay, هيدا بنعمل هون what we call N well for the PMOS. صار عنده in the basis or the body is now what type? N type. So now I have the same type as the body of the PMOS that I have here. Now in this N well, I am going to draw P plus and P plus. Okay, I'm going to draw the insulator, and I'm going to draw the gate material. But if I'm going to ask you, if I want to build this in layers, what is the first layer, the lowermost layer that I should start with? شو هي أول layer that we should start with? What is the lowest layer?
Should be the
الأنول.
The بس عيدوا لي بس سمعتكم منيح. The اللي هي عند عيسى يسال
الأنول.
الأنول, right. Okay, so it should be the annual. So the first layer is the annual. Okay, طيب after this what comes next? And I process different material differently لأنه I can shine the ions at the same time. ما فيني أبعت two types of ions in different locations. I can send one type of material at a time. So I should start with the N plus or the P plus, right? And then I need to build the thin oxide, and then I need to build the gate poly. طيب خلصنا من الgate poly. Let us see what happens here. What do I need to do? So I have the NMOS transistor alone, right? I build the NMOS transistor alone, and I build the PMOS transistor alone. What do I need to do? I need to connect them together. Okay, they are different types, so I need to use the metal to connect them. Okay, فإذا بدي أجي أحط layer of insulator and then do what? And then drill this insulator. I will put an insulator everywhere, and then I'm going to drill the insulator so that I end up drawing a pillar or a contact, and then I draw a connection between the contacts. يعني هي بتصير ب2 steps. First I drill down, fill, then I draw the road that is connecting those two. هيدي بتكون وصلت لي those two drains together. I still need to connect to VDD and to ground, right? So I'm going to drill a contact here. okay, and drill a contact here. This will be then wired to the main VDD, and this will be then wired to the main ground. Okay, so what matters here is that when you see this, you know that this is the PMOS, you know that this is the NMOS, you know that this is the source and the drain and the source, sorry, you know that this is connecting the two transistors together, and that this is connecting to VDD, and that this is connecting to ground. I don't want you to be proficient in learning how to process it as much as just interpreting what you are seeing in front of you on this figure. So is this figure clear? Does anybody have any questions about it? لأنه بس هيك حننقل منها على stick diagram. Yes, Ahmed. Yes,
silicon dioxide layer will have to be applied twice to cover the polysilicon.
The silicon layer, I'm gonna clear the figure and just show you how this happens, okay? So what we will have here is we will have initially the substrate, right? And let us say that we have already reached to the N+, and then we have the poly, okay? And so this is the poly here, and this is the poly here. Okay, and now this is the other transistor. What happens here is that we apply again a layer of silicon dioxide with a certain target thickness, right? And we polish it to reach this thickness, right? And when we apply it, we say, well, now I want to erase here and then fill with the contact, right? So I'm going to fill for the contact location. Okay, and I'm going to fill, let's say these are all the contacts that I'm going to fill. Okay, so in between them, what will we have? We will have the silicon dioxide. هيك بيكون تعبى, the contacts are trenched in their places, right? It's a process, right? يعني every layer has its thickness. Now, and we fill another layer of silicon dioxide, and we want to draw what يعني بيرجعوا بيمحوها بيعملوا layer تانية to make sure that we get routing in this location. Yes, so the processing step to us, it is a little bit complex, but what matters is that to process this path in what we call layer 1, okay, the connection between two contacts in layer 1, it's a different step from processing what we call and what we will refer to as the contact. يعني to drill down هيدا الcontact له processing step, and then to draw the roads that connect these contacts, it's a second processing step. Okay, was that your answer, Isa?
Yes, perfectly, thank you.
Thank you. And every layer comes with silicon dioxide. طب هلا خلينا نطلع احنا على what matters to us. What matters is to understand best the functions in this figure, and also what matters to us is to look at هيدا هلا هون in this layer. What did he add for me? This is what we have seen before. What did he add here? Here I have a P+ that is connecting ground to the main substrate. This is the body, okay, and it's a shared body for all NMOSes. So لوين عم بيوصل البادي؟ ما هيدي P material, هيدي P+, يعني as if he is creating a connection to where? To ground. So he is connecting the body to ground. So he is connecting here the body to ground. The same in the PMOS. Okay, the same in the PMOS. What did he add for me here? He added an N+ tab, and this N+ tab is connecting the body of the PMOS to VDD. It's as if I'm drawing the body connected to VDD. Okay, so this is what he added. This is the only difference between this slide and the slide before it. A is the input and Y is the output. Okay, A is the input and Y is the output. Okay, let me just connect the one. Okay, type, great. So now we know how, if we slice the wafer, how the transistors will look like. Okay, let us jump to the next slide. On this slide, what we have here is the transistor, and we're talking about the different layers. Like, as we agreed, the order of the layers is the wells, then the diffusions. هم نسميهم diffusion لأنه ions diffuse into the main. يعني ions distribute themselves by diffusion into the structure. Polysilicon is really the gate. طبعا في عندنا thin oxide that naturally is drawn and then protected under the gate, and then we have the contact هن pins that go up هيدول بيكونوا vertical. Okay, and then we have the metal اللي هو ال wiring that takes me from one device to another on the chip. Okay, هو هن ال 5 layers as they exist. One little thing that we have here is that this is an exception. What they do so that the source and the drain region are centered around the channel, when they fabricate, they put the gate first, and this way when they shower the ions, we will have a symmetry. And when they expose a non-rectangle around the gate, if this is covered, the drain and the source will build symmetrically around the gate. You see the gate is centered between the drain and the source. And by fabrication, they realized that it is more difficult for them to really center the gate afterwards. Okay, يعني هيدي بس some processing step which is just take known for your own information. لكن هيدي slide summarizes for you the layers. Okay, so first we هلا filling the trenches هيدي بالنيو process لأنه نحن بنحدد وين الويل اللي بدنا نسويه. We need to determine where we want to have the well, but this is the step of putting the wells. Then we put the gate اللي هي البوليسيليكون, and then we put the source and the drain, and then the contacts, and then we draw the metal layers wherever we want them to happen. فإذا basic knowledge that you need to know إنه نحن بنحط الويل بعدين السورس والدرين, بس هيدي بتجي step number 3, بعدين الجيت, بعدين we go up in the layers metal 1, metal 2, and so on so forth. Okay, so بس هيدي هي يلي بتقلب because the process is easier to handle. طب great. هلا هيدا is showing you repeating the steps. I'm not going to focus on it a lot لأنه we already, it's just telling you that it is easier first to build the gate and then to build the source and the drain regions around it. So هي بنسميها self-aligned gates, يعني عندهم point of reference as a midpoint. Okay, this is slightly important for us. Let us see what this slide is telling us. It's telling me this is a cut. This is a cut. The top image is a cut looking into how, if I look down the wafer, the transistor looks, it's a cross section. If I look at it from the top, I will see how the different layers stack and overlap. ليش هيدي important? This is important لأنه كل color code here will represent a mask layer. يعني if my reference is this rectangle and all my masks have the shape of this rectangle, the P well will be equivalent, if there was a PMOS, to all of this size. The gate location will be based on this poly red rectangle. The contact location will be here. That's where I want to expose to light and the drill. The source and the drain diffusions will be here, but if I shower it, when they bump into the poly, nothing will happen. Things will happen around the poly. And if I want to draw a wire, then it should have this shape of this wire and so on and so forth. So كل color code هو color code layer. Okay, so the color coding is for a layer and is for a mask. Okay, one layer, one mask. Okay, that's the bottom line. This is how the engineers talk about the geometries. They don't talk about this. Okay, so let us see what happens here really in the next slide. Okay, since the internet is a little bit slow, sorry. So in the next slide that I have here, let me clear this in. sorry, okay. In the next slide, we are showing here really, this is one transistor. Okay, so here we have insulator. So this is the wafer. Okay, and in the wafer we have some epitaxial layer, يعني على السيرفيس بنكون عملنا very clean layer, and then we start to draw transistors. Okay, this is one transistor, this is another, and in recent technology we're isolating them, and we are هيدا annual يعني PMOS, this is N plus, this is PMOS, يعني هون عندي NMOS وهون عندي PMOS, and then these vertical wires are the contacts, and these horizontal wires are the real wires, okay, on the chip, and they go from one place to another, and so on and so forth. And we have multiple metal layers. So there is always insulator between transistors and between the layers. This is a contact, okay, and this is a wire metal. And if you notice here, the lowest level is called a contact, the top level is called a via, and then this is another metal layer. وبين كل layer layer we have insulator. This is somebody took a chip and really just showed the metal wires, so it is like maps of roads that we see in real life. بس الفرق إنه the gaps that you see here are really filled with insulator. يعني ما عندي بس there are no gaps, there is really insulator between them, which also helps the structural stability of the chip, and the insulator helps reduce the coupling. And if you see, for example, in this chip, first we have the silicon, we have contact, the lowest layer is metal, then all the vertical connections between metal 1 and metal 2, for example, are called vias. So هيدي via 1, via 2 connects metal 2 to metal 3, via 3 connects metal 3 to metal 4, this is via 4 connecting metal 4 to metal 5, and so on and so forth. As we go up, the metal wire becomes larger and wider because it is carrying typically signals that go across the chip. And so we need to have low resistance, and we need the signal to have low IR drop. So no much dissipation in the resistance for long signals. So we needed to go through the bigger and thicker wire, and the lower wires are used to connect locally the different gates and stuff like that. Okay, so هلا طيب عال, how does a chip gets realized? هيدي كمان high level. There are two levels. أول شيء I need to have the die to connect it to the package itself, and then the package to the board. يعني هيدي chip will be within a board. So there are things that we also worry about. وبيدخل فيهم كتير complex stuff that we are not responsible for. أنا بدنا parasitics, بدنا reliable mechanical و little thermal heating, وبدها تكون cheap and effective. And then many people wrote papers about, well, what is Rent's rule? Rent's rule says, if my chip is very complex, really how many pins I can accommodate on the peripheral of the chip is going to be if I have billions of transistors here. Okay, so what Rent came up with is that انه النمبر اوف اي او pins الانبوت اوتبوت pins اللي اخر شيء حوصل فيهم الشيب هو proportional to the number of gates but times some constants, okay, which are fractions, and there are many research areas here. So this is really an image of a chip, how it gets connected to the external pins. You see here the wiring, and then also now there is stuff more complex, as Imad said, which are, and what if I want to connect my chip to another chip? First, they started with the flip chip bonding. يعني I have two chips and I flipped them on top of each other to connect the bonding externally using some soldering points. يعني بخلي آخر layer هي metal, بعمر insulator or something between them, and then I put another die. But now we are talking about 3D chips. And let me see where is the image of the, okay, we don't have the 3D chips, but I'm going to draw it for you here. And in 3D chips, I can draw on one chip the memory. Okay, and then I can draw on another the processor, and I can draw what we call through silicon via. يعني كيف الفيا اللي بتوصل so this is called TSV اللي بتوصل metal layer على metal layer. هلا في vias that connect one chip to another chip so that they can stack the different functional chips. طبعا heating is a problem and stuff like that. So لكن نحن when we want to fabricate things on silicon we need to first draw the netlist اللي هي مثل ما طلعنا على الانفرتر, and then we need to draw the layout, which is a physical description, a geometrical description of the different layers of this circuit. There are some design rules. يعني أنا ما فيني أحط two wires very close to each other because the printing cannot be this fine and they may end up being one. So we will talk about these design rules, and there are the rules really correspond to the ability of the photolithography. Then we translate this layout to the optical masks, and then we perform the lithography. So this is in a nutshell the fabrication process, okay, that we handle, and the mask layers handle the well, the poly, the source drain, the contacts, and the metal, and we use field oxide to separate the different metal layers. طب, great. So let us briefly jump and look into the next lecture, which we just looked at with your friends. So لكن I will start with with a schematic of the circuit, and then from the schematic of the circuit I'm going to build my hierarchical design. I will also perform timing analysis, okay, and so this involves many steps. يعني مثل ما قال عماد, we have the Verilog file, we need from the Verilog file to do the logic synthesis, then the net listing, then perform timing analysis, and split the design, and do technology mapping, and do all of these optimizations. So for purposes of simulation, we are relying on HSpice. There are other open source simulators. HSpice is industry caliber, and for the corresponding schematic that we simulate with HSpice, there's a corresponding layout. Typically, Cadence is used as the popular layout editor, okay? And those layout editors, they get basically translate the schematic, okay, into the specific layout. Great. Let us see what we have here. So here we have the basic inverter, and we have the NMOS and the PMOS. The most important thing that we need to know is that in a layout, the intersection of poly and the source diffusion, okay, source drain diffusion, is really a transistor. يعني anytime you see a layout with the green, with the red on top of the green, this means that I have here a channel underneath this, and this comprises a transistor whose length is this dimension and whose width is the width of the rectangle. ليش؟ لأنه the current is going to flow from the drain to the source underneath the transistor. So the distance that the electrons cross اللي هي من هون لهون بالchannel هي length, and the width of this channel really represents how much current is going to flow, and therefore represents the width of the transistor. So this is very important for you to remember, okay? So لكن الترانزستور هو polysilicon gate and a material that we call N diffusion. هلا نحن صحيح الماسك للديفيوجن هو all of this rectangle. Because the poly is intercepting it, we will get only to print the diffusion in those two locations, okay? But the diffusion rectangle is typically drawn as the whole rectangle. Okay, so if this is the poly and the N diffusion, and this forms really for me the source and the drain region, and this is the gate, then the L drawn is the area is this distance between the source and the drain, and the W is the width of the transistor, is really goes longitudinally across the polysilicon. يعني هو من هون لهون. هيدا الويدث للترانزستور. Okay, so last thing which we will continue next time, let us see what happens. I have the diffusion, I have the poly. I'm going to draw a contact. This is where I'm going to draw a pin that is going to connect my diffusion to the metal that will eventually be drawn here to take me to a wire that goes somewhere else. فإذا when we drew the transistor, we will have the different layers in the source drain diffusion, الجيت poly, الcontact والmetal. هيدول الأربعة layers that we care for, and we will pick up from here next time. Okay, thank you. Anybody has a question? طيب, next time we will take the example of the inverter layout and jump to the more interesting stuff of the stick diagrams and the logic gates. نرجع على CMOS gates و how to use simple Euler paths to draw them. Okay. طيب, thank you very much everybody. Yeah, I have a chat question here.